Welcome back, everybody. It is Monday, October the 26th. We are now 8 days away from the elections on the 3rd of November. Control of the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives will once again be up as they are every 2 and 4 years, although this time, obviously, the Senate is an actual play for both parties, and so we'll see what happens there. This is going to be our 8-day presidential election prediction video, as promised. Starting at the 10-day mark, we are making a presidential and senatorial election update each day up until day 0 on Tuesday, November 3rd itself. That is just a week from tomorrow. It's been such a long campaign season, but we've finally arrived. So let's get right into it. We do have some new developments, as we said. There's always a big rash of news and everything like that. And then right over those last 10 days, it's time to just break everything down. So let's get right into it. State of Hawaii, we know how that's going to go. Safe Democratic state. The Republican Party, I think, does deserve a little bit of respect in Hawaii from time to time. As we know, they can get a moderate elected here, as they did before David Ige took over as governor. But obviously, in an election like this, Donald Trump is no moderate. We know that, so that's not going to matter. Now in Alaska, it's going to be so interesting to see what happens here because we really don't know exactly what the pulse of this state is right now. Even the highly ranked pollsters, the very highly graded pollsters, Siena College, New York Times, polls like that, even they have a difficult time really deciphering and analyzing exactly where this state stands from time to time. We don't really know too much about the Senate race going on here. We'll break that down more in our Senate election prediction video. But at the same time, the polling we do have does show Donald Trump up. I'm going to narrow this down to a lean, though, for Donald Trump. Mostly not entirely because of too much that we've seen in terms of data in this state itself, but just of what we've seen nationally, and because Alaska has shown over the years to not be at all afraid of electing a Democrat or an independent, things of that nature. And I think you have a Senate race here that's helping the Democrats' chances here, as well as the fact that, again, we know how unpopular Donald Trump is in general. So that's interesting there. In the state of Washington, obviously, this is a safe Democratic state, but, everything that we've seen with the protests over racial injustice over this past 6-8 months, that's only just going to be furthered by what we're seeing in Washington. Oregon, the exact same scenario is playing out there. Oregon's a state that the Republicans are a little more competitive in than Washington, but obviously not competitive enough. And then obviously California, we know the story there. Now in Nevada, the Democratic Party has reason to be concerned here. I'm a little surprised that the Biden campaign hasn't put a little more emphasis on this state in these final weeks. They are spending here, but I'm surprised it hasn't been a little bit more, just because the pandemic, I think, is definitely going to threaten what is normally a very, very high and very effective turnout operation that the Democrats have in this state. The Republicans are always overstated in polling in this state. We know that. That's been established over and over and over again, to the point where even Donald Trump led on that Tuesday morning 4 years ago, if you can believe that, but no one really ultimately expected him to win at the end of the day. The reason I say they should be worried, the Democrats, is because that margin for error that, is not that big for them in this state could be threatened again by the fact that turnout could be a little lower because of the pandemic. But if we've learned anything over these last few weeks, turnout is just astronomically high right now, in spite of the pandemic. So I'm going to upgrade this for the Democrats back to a likely. I previously had it as a lean. I'm going back up to likely. Idaho will be safe. Now, I want to touch on Utah because this is going to be an interesting state to see the final margins in. Obviously, we know Trump is going to win it. Okay, but let's talk about why this is interesting. First of all, the popular vote, it doesn't matter, obviously, in terms of who wins, but it could matter in terms of national confidence in the outcomes of the election. And should this thing advance to a court decision, you have to imagine that we know Joe Biden's going to win the popular vote. We know that. But you have to imagine if the popular vote is so lopsided that he wins by 5 million or more votes, let's even say, that could potentially move the needle in a potential court decision. Now, we know that the federal judiciary and, of course, the Supreme Court of the United States are right of center. But who knows if that will ultimately hold true should this thing come down to something like it did in the year 2000. So obviously, from a likelihood characterization, this will be safe, but the final margin will be interesting because there are a number of factors as to why the final margin will be closer here. First of all, Mitt Romney, a beloved figure, he has said that he did not vote for Donald Trump. He already voted. Evan McMullin, who is respected enough to the point where he got more than 1 out of every 5 votes in this state in 2016, endorsed Joe Biden. It's also a state where we've seen polling be a little closer than usual. The Democrats picked up a House seat here in 2018. They're expected to retain that. Ben McAdams, the House member from the Salt Lake City area. So that's all reason to say I would expect the Democrats to do a little bit better in this state than usual. And when we look back at the popular vote and we say, where did this all come from? It may not just be these gigantic safe states like New York and California. You might be able to point to Utah and say, oh, that was a little closer than usual. Okay, in the state of Arizona, this is a realignment state. Now, I received a comment on our last video from a viewer who said the following. He said, can you explain to me what a, quote, realignment state is? So I'm very glad you asked that. Thank you for that question. And again, the only reason I cannot address the commenters by name is there's a little bit of a sort of a cloudiness surrounding some laws about naming commenters on video. It's probably not a problem. I just don't want to test that at all. So let's just, just to be safe there. This commenter, thank you again for your question, asked, what is a realignment state? What does that mean? What does that constitute? You get the idea. So here's what it means. For a long time, basically, the electorate is divided up into tiers and you can sort of see it here, right? Tilt, lean, likely safe. The state of California, the state of New York, Vermont, even though it has a Republican governor, now Virginia, Illinois, those are bastions. Those are safe, Democratic base states. They're Hawaii in there, Delaware, all these New England states up here, all that. You get the point. So and the Republicans have their own, versions of that. The big red wall, as we know, Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, all that. So what a realignment state is a state like Arizona, where we've seen how it has shifted from red to blue. And so now going forward, has it shifted entirely from red to blue? We can't say that for sure yet, but it's definitely looking more and more like that. And so what the point is now the entire national map changes. And so these tiers have to be realigned a little bit to accommodate a state like Arizona shifting further and further away from the Republicans and more towards the Democrats. So I think, going forward, let's be honest, okay? 9 days from now, okay, on that Wednesday, let's be entirely honest, I think we should expect that Joe Biden is going to win the state of Arizona and that there will be 2 senators from the state of Arizona that are Democrats, okay? And so, while there is still a Republican governor, I think the fact that a presidential candidate, I think the Democratic presidential candidate wins the state, that both senators are Democrats, and that more House members from the state are Democrats than Republicans, yeah, I would say to me that kind of suggests that this has been lost by the GOP. And so now going forward, we have to realign, is where that word comes from, all of our projections and begin to think of Arizona as a blue state, kind of like Nevada is. So I hope that answers that question. If it doesn't, please comment down again. I'll try to clarify it a little bit further. So right now, Mark Kelly is definitely helping Joe Biden a little bit. He has been outperforming Joe Biden in this state. Mark Kelly, the Democratic Senate candidate in this state, husband of Gabrielle Giffords, he is a shoo-in at this point for that Senate seat. The Democrats look very strong out there in Arizona. And Joe Biden looks strong, not quite as strong, though, as Mark Kelly. So this is still a battleground state that both sides are fighting heavily in. The Trump campaign seems a little resigned to the fact that they kind of see the writing on the wall a little bit in this state, which is bad news for them because, they lose this state, they're going to have to make it up somehow. And I'm not sure really where they're going to because one thing we know for sure, Donald Trump is not really going to come away flipping too many states in this election, if any. Okay, maybe he can flip 1, maybe, but that's highly unlikely. Even that is highly unlikely. So he just has to hang on to his votes. And if he loses 11 in Arizona, that's a bad start for him. I expect it to end up that way, closer than people think. I have it as a tilt. Now in Montana, we've talked about it many times on the senatorial level. Very fascinating to watch there, even though I think the Republicans have the edge. Obviously in the presidential race, it's going to remain safe, as will the state of Wyoming. Now in Colorado, again, a lot of people still consider this a swing state. I just don't. Okay, let's sort of lump these 2 states together, Colorado and New Mexico, because they're kind of similar in this calculation here. So both of them are still labeled swing states by 538. They're also both labeled swing states by a mobile video game called 270. Um, I don't really see why that's the case. Okay, New Mexico has gone to the Democrats since 2004. Colorado, of course, was a pivotal state, back in 2008 for Barack Obama. And it was pivotal in that, it was sort of like a bellwether state, so to speak. That's not really the case anymore because both of them have really gone firmly into the Democratic Party's column. We've known for a little while now that the Sun Belt is becoming more and more Democratic and less Republican. And further evidence by the just look at the statewide races. Okay, I mean Cory Gardner won, a Republican, won in 2014 a Senate seat here in a huge Republican wave year. Okay, 6 years later, more demographic shifts and the fact that this still remains definitely a left of center state. John Hickenlooper, as we know, very popular Democratic governor, relinquished his seat to run for president briefly, just, dropped out, switched gears, is now running for Senate, and is in all likelihood going to win against Cory Gardner. Why do I say all likelihood? Well, polling has been consistent for him. He has out fundraised Cory Gardner, if that's a word. And most recently, both, the Republicans kind of waved the white flag here. They stopped spending on this race, and the Democrats stopped spending on this race. There are only 8 days left. Both sides kind of know the writing's on the wall here. Cory Gardner, at this point, I think, is looking for other work altogether. Let's be honest, any Democrat, even a relatively weak candidate, I think would have probably edged this one out. But the fact that it's John Hickenlooper solidifies this. And that is only going to help Joe Biden, as if there was really any doubt about this state. Now, that's not to say that I don't even think Donald Trump is going to reach 45% here. I would imagine this is, a pretty big wipeout for what is still considered a swing state. I would imagine 41% or somewhere around there for Donald Trump. And I'm going to basically say the same thing about New Mexico. Okay, Ben Ray Lujan is running for that open seat. This was one of 7 seats that the Democrats flipped on the gubernatorial level. In 2018, Michelle Lujan Grisham, the governor here, was for a time considered on the VP ticket for Joe Biden. So that's kind of where I see these 2 states ending up. Now, North Dakota, there's not really much to talk about here. I mean, the Democrats for some time, had some success here between Kent Conrad and Heidi Heitkamp. Those days are over. Okay, they were even kind of over before 2018 when Heidi Heitkamp lost. There was obviously a lot of talk about her potentially, winning again against all the odds. That was a one-time occurrence. Everyone knew she was going to lose that race. It's basically like I kind of draw it akin to what's going on in Alabama in the Senate race down there between Doug Jones and Tommy Tuberville. That's kind of what that was between Kevin Cramer and Heidi Heitkamp. And so now, South Dakota is a little different. I think it's a state the Democrats have a better presence in. They came relatively close, actually, to winning that governorship when Kristi Noem only barely defeated Bill. Maybe not barely, but it was within about 5 or 6%. Bill Sutton, the Democratic candidate there. The Democrats have had success there in the past. Tim Johnson, all that. So, I obviously on this one, it's going to be just fine for the Republicans, as will Nebraska. Nebraska is very different from the Dakotas. It's altogether very safe. Now, Kansas is obviously compelling. In the Senate race here, which is relatively close between Barbara Bollier and Roger Marshall. And we saw what happened in the governor's race here between Laura Kelly and Chris Kobach when Chris Kobach when Laura Kelly won that race. And then Chris Kobach was primaried out by GOP voters who nominated Roger Marshall for this Senate seat. So interesting to watch here, but on the presidential level, it'll be fine, just as Oklahoma will. Now, in Texas, just yesterday, we changed the characterization here from the first time from tilt red to tilt blue. Now, I know it's got to be sort of maddening to see a whole state shift in one day, but I'm going to have to change this back altogether. After only 24 hours, if even that. And why? Well, again, as the facts change, my opinion changes. We saw just today, a Siena College New York Times Upshot poll had Donald Trump leading by 4%. Okay. There was also a Data for Progress poll, though, that showed Biden ahead by 1%. So these two are clearly in an absolute dead heat. Absolute dead heat in this state. I can't say that it's basically at this point, it's almost identical to Georgia in that it's literally a coin flip, according to the polling. Neither side has an edge. I believe it's still, according to, 538 changes this all the time, so we might as well just take a look here. But the reality of the situation is Yeah, so 538 has Donald Trump up by 0.2%. Okay, so that's insignificant. That's a tie. However, the reason I say it's basically like Georgia is we've seen rampant voter suppression efforts in this state. And these states have identities at the end of the day. Both of them just barely have Republican tinges. Now, look, if tomorrow comes along and I see another poll that has Joe Biden up by 2-3%, I'm going to have to change this back. Because when this race is this close, that's kind of where it stands. Okay, so that, Donald Trump, if he loses Texas, I mean, he's in a bad enough position elsewhere on this map. He loses Texas, it's over. Now, in Minnesota, this has gotten away from the GOP. It really has. This was an opportunity for them to sort of to begin to expand their outreach a little bit. Hillary Clinton only carried this state by 1.5% with a plurality, mind you. Okay, the Democrats won the governorship here and both Senate seats in 2018, the midterm. So that was the first sign, and then everything that we saw happening here in the Minneapolis area over the last year, or less than that, really the last half year, pretty much helps solidify this for the Democrats. So I'm going to label it safe. Now in Iowa, the senatorial race is also basically a literal coin flip. We'll talk about it more in our Senate prediction video, but there's hardly any way at all to tell which way Iowa is going to go on the senatorial level. Now, this was kind of like Ohio, a state that was really a big shift from left to right. Remember, Barack Obama and Joe Biden carried the state both in 2008 and 2012. And it was not even close in 2016. Trump won this very, very easily. He's not going to win it very easily this time. It's not going to be something we call right at closing hour. In fact, I would imagine they really pay attention to this for a couple hours, the networks do. It's a state where polling traditionally is very accurate. We've seen over the years that polling in this state is one of the most accurate states in the country in that it just usually stays exactly true to what the final averages show. So let's look at those averages. There's a tie, Biden +2, +2. These are the most recent ones. Trump +7, and then a tie, and then you got a bunch of House race polls, then a tie, Biden +3, and a New York Times poll. So that's notable. Then +5 for Biden, +3, -1, and then we scroll down a little bit further, a tie. So it's close, okay? It's very close. Now, I know that Joe Biden recently has been the one leading in the polls here, and we've seen Teresa Greenfield take just a teeny tiny edge over Joni Ernst in that Senate race, but I just can't quite see the Democrats making up that much ground. Okay, this is like 10-12% that they got to make up. Now, they did make up some of it in the gubernatorial race in 2018 when Kim Reynolds, a Republican incumbent, did win, though. It was a lot closer. It was about 6 points that she defeated Fred Hubbell by. But on a presidential level, is Donald Trump going to lose that much support? I can't be totally certain of that. Now, Missouri, it's always interesting to point this state out because of what happened in 2008 when Barack Obama came within 4,000 votes of winning this state. But we know that, it's not really a state really worth discussing. They'll probably count for a little while, but we know what's going to happen there. Same in Arkansas and same in Louisiana. I'm sorry for my viewers that live in these two states that we just kind of gloss these over, but there's just nothing to talk about. There's a Senate election in both of these states. There's not really a serious challenger in either of them. And, we don't really get much polling out of either of them either. There was one outlier poll from real early on in the election season that had Trump only leading by 3% in Arkansas. Who cares? I mean, it's obviously a very, very, very safe Republican state, as is Louisiana, even though there is a Democratic governor, kind of a Democrat in name only, let's be honest, John Bel Edwards, but you get the idea. Now, in Mississippi, turnout's high, okay? And that's obviously going to favor the Democrats. But it's kind of like Iowa in the sense that there's just too much ground to make up, and there's never been an indication to show that Donald Trump is in any kind of real danger here. Neither side is spending too much. Now, the Lincoln Project did just throw their hat in the ring in the Senate race going on here between Cindy Hyde-Smith and Mike Espy. Look, Mike Espy's a strong candidate. He has raised a pretty good sum of money. He came relatively close in that special election between him and Cindy Hyde-Smith a couple years ago, but yeah, I mean, I'd be shell-shocked if he won that race, and even more shell-shocked if Donald Trump won it. Now, this is more of a likelihood characterization than a margin, just because turnout is very high amongst the black community this time around, but Mississippi will go to Trump in its 6 electoral votes, as will Alabama. It's basically the exact same story as Mississippi. Doug Jones is going to lose. We know that, to Tommy Tuberville. You have to imagine there's some turnout also just as a result of that. You have to imagine Alabama voters are not thrilled that one of their senators is a Republican. So that's worth mentioning as well. Now, in Florida, obviously, this is a state that is very difficult to get your finger around. Polling is sometimes kind of incorrect here. Now, look, the Democrats, elected Joe Biden in the state twice, along with Barack Obama, of course, in 2008 and in 2012. The polls in 2016 were actually pretty accurate. They had Hillary Clinton down 1 point on election day, and that's basically what it ended up being. Trump won it by about 1.2% in this state. Now, in the midterms, the Republicans did pretty well here, okay? And remember, there was so much energy in this state about those 2018 midterms because this was not that long after the Parkland school shooting. So there was a lot of activism, brewing there, and we had a governorship race and a Senate race in that state. And the Republicans still won, both of them. Now, they were very, very, very close. Rick Scott only defeated Bill Nelson by about 10,000 votes. Ron DeSantis defeated Andrew Gillum by like 35,000 votes. Those are airtight races. Now, obviously, we saw the passage of Amendment 4 in this state, which guaranteed, well, not guaranteed, evidently, it gave, let's say, the right to 1.4 million felons to vote. Now, the GOP, the state GOP, national, they have done a great job of minimizing that through court challenges. It's estimated that about 8% of those 1.4 million will actually end up voting. Of course, not all 8% of them are going to vote for Joe Biden either, but you have to imagine plenty of them will and the majority will. And in a state with margins this close, where the polling has been favoring Joe Biden, in a big Democratic wave year with an unpopular incumbent GOP president, that's why, all that in mind, I think I have this state as a tilt for the Democrats. Now, Georgia, as I said, very similar to Texas. Rampant voter suppression efforts. Again, these aren't my words. Okay, these are just the words of federal judges, and we've seen admissions of this by the GOP. And it's also a state where voting is not, very well run either. We've seen people waiting in lines for 12 hours at a time, and there are 2 statewide races going on here that are fascinating to watch, though. There's a general Senate election, which is close, very close, between Jon Ossoff and David Perdue. I don't think enough people are talking about that race. Jon Ossoff has a chance to win that seat. He's losing just barely, and he's never really been able to quite break through against David Perdue. But David Perdue did not help himself when he made that sort of racist, intentional mispronunciation of Kamala Harris's name. And within hours, we saw Jon Ossoff raise over $2 million, or his campaign did. So very interesting to watch here. And then the special election is also compelling to watch because Raphael Warnock, the Democratic candidate, looks like he is in position to, at a minimum, advance to a runoff and potentially win. Okay, so just amazing to see what's going to happen in this state. I expect Joe Biden to lose here, but I do think he's going to get around 49% of the vote. Okay, which is pretty close. All right, they're going to be counting in this state for a while. It's kind of a similar, theme for the Democrats in this state. They get a pretty good vote share, and they just can't quite push it over the edge. South Carolina, this is a likelihood characterization, not a margin. The margin will be close, I think, or not that close, but respectable. I would expect Joe Biden to do around what James Smith, the Democratic candidate for governor, did in this state against Henry McMaster. I would imagine this state ends up being about 54 to 46 as a final margin, and another big indicator of the final popular vote margins. Tennessee will be a safe Republican state, we know that. Now in North Carolina, Joe Biden has begun to stretch the lead a little bit here. However, those are according to some very low regarded pollsters. Let's look at the most recent polling. Biden plus, these are SurveyMonkey polls. Now they're very low graded, but they have huge sample sizes. Okay, so let's go through it. +6, this is for Biden, +8, +4, -3, but that's a Trafalgar Group poll, which is a notably conservative-leaning pollster. Then back to the presidential polling here, +4, +4, and then -1, +3, +2, +3, +3, +4, +2, +3, +1, that's a lead. That's a lead. And he's being boosted, I think, a little bit by Cal Cunningham, a Democratic Senate challenger against Thom Tillis, who is in real danger of losing his Senate seat. There's also a governor's election happening here. that the Democrats are expected to win. This is going to be a bellwether state. And basically within the first hour of counting, I think we're going to get an idea of how this election night is going to go. Because in this state, look, if Donald Trump loses the state of North Carolina and it's 15 electoral votes, do you really expect him to win the election? Now, obviously, he has more than 15 votes to spare because, he had 306 electoral votes last time, and we know he's not going to add any votes. And so, he loses North Carolina, he's down to 291 rather. Remember, even Barack Obama and Joe Biden, they won it their first time around in 08 and then lost it 4 years later. They lost Indiana as well. But if North Carolina, which is kind of a right-leaning state, even though, it's basically a swing state, even though it's a right-leaning state, what does that tell you? Okay, first of all, if Joe Biden wins in North Carolina, that definitely means Cal Cunningham has won his Senate seat. We know Roy Cooper, the governor, is going to win. So this state goes that way. That is a bellwether, okay? I think that means Pennsylvania is in Joe Biden's column. And what does that tell you about Florida? And that tells you that minority turnout is very high. There's a high African-American population in North Carolina. You have to think, if this state goes Donald Trump's way, then maybe he's going to be able to survive this. But if it goes Joe Biden's way, And right now, I still think it's a tilt for Joe Biden. Kentucky will be safe for the Republicans, as will West Virginia. Virginia will be safe for the Democrats. Illinois will be safe for the Democrats as well. Now, in Indiana, as I said, this was a state that Barack Obama and Joe Biden won in 2008. And up until just 2 years ago, Joe Donnelly was a Democratic senator from this state. So there was definitely a firm presence here. However, this is a conservative state. We know this. Again, a popular vote state is going to, this is kind of a popular vote determinant state. Because, you have to imagine there's going to be a lot of turnout in Gary, Indiana, the suburbs of Chicago that kind of leak over into Indiana. Indianapolis, the turnout's going to be high, the whole nine. Of course, Mike Pence puts this over the top, though, and you have to imagine that, Donald Trump's not going to face any real problems in this state when it's 11 electoral votes. All right, now in Ohio, it's very similar to Iowa for me. Again, another state that Barack Obama and Joe Biden carried both times in 2008 and in 2012. Okay, the reality of the situation is it's just not really a state that the Democrats are in too good a position in right now. It's a hard state. Okay, even on the best of days, it's a hard state for the Democrats. It's a largely pro-life. Okay, it's quite Catholic. Even the Democrats there are quite Catholic. They didn't have a huge day in the midterms here. They re-elected Sherrod Brown relatively easily, but he's a very popular incumbent senator. That was never in too big question. And the governorship here was won by Mike DeWine, against Richard Cordray, the Democrat. So, pretty clearly, it goes to show you, this state has a little bit of an identity. It's kind of similar to North Carolina. It has a tinge and a little bit of a tilt rightward. And again, similarly to Iowa, yeah, it's going to definitely narrow up. Donald Trump is not going to win this state by the same margin that he did. I think Joe Biden has a chance at this state, but I would be a little surprised. I think that he'll again sort of peter out around 47-48%, though there will be a few hours that go by of some counting. You may again see this whole thing that happens when you're watching on television where you get a certain vote total that comes in with about a third of the vote in and it shows Joe Biden way ahead, when in reality all that's really happened is they've just gotten to the votes in Akron and Cleveland and Cincinnati first, and then Donald Trump will come from the rear. So I still expect this to go Donald Trump's ways, the first over 200. Okay, now Maryland, we know that's a safe Democratic state, as will the 3 votes in D.C., the most liberal area in the United States. Okay, and Wisconsin, a state that Donald Trump carried in 2016, surprisingly, in 2016. Everyone goes on and on and on about how, quote-unquote, wrong the polls were in this state. Sorry to break it, they just weren't. Okay, they just weren't that wrong at all. In fact, they were far more incorrect in 2018 in the midterms. Okay, this was the only state, though, in which it was just completely wrong. Okay, Hillary Clinton led by just under 7% in this state. Now, it's a little similar to Nevada. We know that Democrats in this state are often overstated because some of these pollsters fail to account for white rural voters, typically in the northern portions of the state. Now, the Democrats have seen some real positive signs in this state since 2016. They flipped a state Senate special election. down here in the southern portion of the state, giving them the first Democrat to represent that district since the 70s. That happened in the first year of Trump's term. They flipped the governorship here. They ousted Scott Walker. That's a big deal. Scott Walker is a big national Republican figure. That was a big win for them. They also retained a senator here. Tammy Baldwin was up for re-election. She won. By the way, there is already a Democratic candidate for the Senate seat here in 2022. That's Ron Johnson, who won in 2016, who has not yet said if he's going to run again in 2022. There's already a Democratic candidate for that seat. His name is Tom Nelson. We don't need to get into that right away. So there's obviously a lot of enthusiasm here. And then even after all those races in the midterms, the Democrats also flipped a Supreme Court seat here. And to me, that was the biggest telltale sign. Because that happened earlier this year. The pandemic was already raging on by that point. And on top of it, because of the pandemic, 180 polling sites in the city of Milwaukee were reduced down to 5. Okay, so that combined with steady polling leads gives me this as a likely for Joe Biden in the state of Wisconsin, and that is a crucial 10 electoral votes for him. The Republicans have waved the white flag in Michigan. Let's just call it like it is. They are not contesting this. This was the closest of the Rust Belt states that Donald Trump won in 2016. He won it by 0.27%. Very, very, very close. Since then, the Democrats have, again, had a very strong showing here. They retained Debbie Stabenow against John James. John James is trying again in the Senate seat, this time against Gary Peters. I don't expect him to win there. And then they also flipped the governorship, just like Wisconsin, when Gretchen Whitmer defeated Bill Schuette, the Republican candidate for governor. So they went 2 for 2 there. And I expect that's going to carry over, especially given the fact we just haven't seen almost any effort by the Republicans to flip this back into their column. So, why should we believe that Donald Trump is suddenly going to come from behind and win the state? And there's another 16 for Joe Biden. Pennsylvania, it's kind of a similar story, although both sides are fighting tooth and nail over this state. Okay. Scrappy Scranton Joe. Okay. That's, we know the whole thing with him. That's where he's from, Scranton, Pennsylvania. He's got some popularity in this portion of the country. We know that whole thing. Pennsylvania was kind of the last state to go Donald Trump's way that pretty much pushed him over the edge and towards 270 electoral votes. Okay, it's just like Michigan and Wisconsin. The Democrats won both statewide races in the state in 2018 when they won the governorship and the Senate race. Only that time, both of them were incumbencies. Okay, so again, both sides have been trying like hell to win this state. Polling has been close here, but for the most part, Joe Biden has a small lead. I think this is going to be very close on Election Day. I'm going to label this tilt. I think that Joe Biden is trying really hard to boost turnout in the Philadelphia suburbs. If he can do that, he will win. Delaware, that's his home state. We know what's going to happen there. We know about New Jersey. We know about Connecticut. We know about Rhode Island. And we know about Massachusetts. And, of course, we know about New York. And we know about Vermont as well. Now, the only thing really left here is New Hampshire. This was the closest race in 2016, okay? Hillary Clinton barely won this race, okay, by about 2,000 votes. Now, the Senate election that night was between Maggie Hassan and a Republican whose name is escaping me. That was a flip for the Democrats, which made that night just ever so slightly more bearable for them. They did flip 2 Senate seats, even though it did look like they may have had a chance to flip the Senate altogether. There was a big race in Wisconsin. Florida, there were some races they just came up a little short in. But they did flip a seat in Illinois, and they flipped a seat in New Hampshire. And so right now there is a Senate race going on there. Jeanne Shaheen is giving it a crack, or is being challenged, I should say, but against Kelly Ayotte, the Republican candidate there. But as we know in the state of New Hampshire, if you're a Republican, you can win. You just have to be sort of a notable Republican of some renown and of some, moderate policies. And that's just, we haven't really seen that from Kelly Ayotte, especially the first part. She's just not really well known enough. If you knew who Kelly Ayotte was, please tell me in the comments, because I sure didn't until this election cycle rolled around. And again, polling's just been very safe for them, and I can't see that this is a state that Joe Biden's going to lose. Now, in Maine, it's basically the same thing all over again. It's the same, the 3 out of the 4 votes go for Joe Biden, 1 goes for Maine. And again, this is not a done deal yet, the rural district up in northern Maine, because Jared Golden is a Democrat who represents that district in the House, and he is cruising on his way to a re-election. So there's your map. Joe Biden still flips in Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We still don't know yet about Texas. We really don't. We don't know entirely about Iowa. I think it's pretty clear that Joe Biden's going to come up a little short in Ohio, and we definitely don't know about the outcome in Georgia yet either. So this is kind of the state of this race right now. Okay, with basically a week left. If you're a Trump voter, and I hope there are some of you out there watching, are you confident in this right now? Because this is basically a conservative estimate on my part, in that Texas is basically a dead heat. Iowa, I think, still leans a certain way, obviously. Same with Ohio, and Georgia's also just a dead heat. The only real reason that we're characterizing 54 more votes for Donald Trump is because that's a quarter of his votes here, is because I think these states really just have identities, whereas the polling and all the data we've seen in recent years kind of shows the opposite, if we're being entirely honest. So this is not that close an election, 333 to 205. It's 27 votes bigger for Biden than it was for Trump 4 years ago, and this could very well be a total landslide. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please comment down in the suggestions below. Hit the like button if you have not already, and the subscribe button, as I said. Please comment down questions, comments, concerns, corrections, anything you want to point out. And as I have shown you, I will always try to answer as many questions as I can. Obviously, try to make it a real insightful question, like something I can actually respond to and talk to you about, because I love communicating with you guys about what we're seeing with all this data. So thank you guys again so much for watching. I'll see you in November.